Mr. Chair, members of the board, Dr. Hamlin, members of the cabinet, members of the public. So tonight's kind of a two-pronged approach. As you're aware, we've just wrapped up our fiscal year, so I wanted to bring some unpleasant news from the results of our operations of the fiscal year. And some of the information with regard to the state budget is firmed up now that the General Assembly has passed some legislation that's going to affect our budget next year. So this is really the point of tonight, is just to kind of update the board where we're at 20 days after the close of the fiscal year. So first off, as you recall, in February we came to the board with second quarter of fiscal year 24 financial statements, and we noticed some troubling trends. At that point, we were anticipating about a $2.5 million loss for the year. We put in some corrective actions that ultimately were designed to address that $2.5 million loss. We're putting those in place in March of the fiscal year. Only allowed us one quarter to actually try and recap any of the savings from that through attrition. And as we explained at that time, it was going to take time for those things to matriculate through the budget. We wouldn't really get any real savings in that year, but we can expect them in years to come. Unfortunately, the $2.5 million was significantly under where we ended the year. These numbers are based on where we're at June 30th, 2024. So these are cash basis numbers. Our local fund is an accrual basis fund. There will be receivables and payables that will have to be accrued back, which is to say that this number is subject to change based on adjustments and then audit adjustments. So as of the year end fiscal year 24 in the local fund, the district experienced a $5.1 million loss. That is about $2.6 million beyond the $2.5 we were anticipating in February of this year. As you can see, our salary benefits lines exceeded budget by $7 million, and our non-salary lines were actually about $2 million to the good. In the abstract, talked a lot about how last year our staff fill ratios were at about 88%. This year we're experiencing fill ratios of 98%. So any lap salaries we were expecting in the budget were not available this year, and that is the primary reason for the overspend.
That's the primary reason you said?
Seems so. I mean, as you look, budget versus actual, we're $7 million over in salaries.
So that's an important point.
It is. It is. And if you were to do the numbers on this, the actuals, we've always thrown around the 82% is salaries. If you took 79.9 million over the 94.5, you would come up with 85.1%. So our salaries as percentage of the budget is growing as we approach zero vacancy.
If we could just clarify, not because we've added new positions.
Correct.
Because we have a better fill rate.
Yes. Correct. Correct. And we have a 10% better fill rate.
We were already saying I just want to be clear.
Sorry. But that is.
It's an important point, because you're saying that our teachers and staff, people, one, want to work here, and two, they want to stay here in numbers we've not seen in recent years.
Right. It's almost
Is that fair to
ironic.
say?
It is. It's the irony of it is that the board did all of these things to really improve recruitment and retention, and it did great, but now we're feeling negative impact of it because we're so heavily.
Understood, yeah.
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 It's not a bad problem.
Right.
From a staffing perspective, it's a great problem to have. The problem is, we just don't have the budget to support the staffing that we have. That's the problem. Okay, so what does that mean? And if you recall, or actually I'll get into that in a minute, but what it means, I'm going to skip forward to this slide because I think it's important to do this one first. As we talk about fund balance, it means that when we ended the year last year in our local fund, we had $5.5 million in fund balance. Unassigned, reserved, assigned, all of it together, $5.5 million. We lost, we're anticipating losing 5.1 this year. So what it means is that the fund balance is essentially liquidated at this point. And we've known this day is coming for several years. course, it's also important to realize that fund balance, although it is not exactly representative of cash and bank, it is an analog of cash and bank. So if you go down at the fund balance at the end of the year, you can see that we went from a position in 2020 where we had about $16 million in the bank when we closed the books to $12 million in 2022, $5.5 million in 2023, $396,000 in 2024. And we start talking about operating cash and months of operations, and then last year we were talking about weeks of operations. And now we're talking about days of operations, right? So I'm trying to point this out to really point out, where we are now and the severity of the situation that we're in. And again, just to kind of look at it graphically, our fund balance, you see, we're estimating it at 500,000. Of course, that's cash basis. The accruals could come in, that could go up a little bit, or could also go down a little bit, depending on where those accruals land. But for all intents and purposes, the vast majority of our fund balance has been expended as of June 30th, 2024.
Jonathan, and this is basically the same slide you showed us 2 years ago.
It is, matter of fact, right, I looked back at that presentation, it
And
was
it's
July
important to
20th.
know that we've seen this day coming.
Yep.
It's not just because something didn't get paid attention to or something. Yeah,
July 20th, 2022.
yes, thank you.
So what does that mean? I think now we need to recognize that we've had pervasive spending deficits. So we need to think about what that's gonna mean for our budget moving forward. Obviously, we don't have the fund balance to rely on, the safety net to rely on that we've had in years past, to appropriate fund balance to balance the budget to continue operations in the same manner that they were before. Matter of fact, if you go back and look at that abstract from 2022, it was very clear that if funding is not increased to the level to meet the expenses at some point, the educational offerings of the district will have to be modified, right? That we can't continue to offer the same level of service as we continue to dig into our fund balance.
And Jonathan, I'm sorry to interrupt, keep interrupting.
You're fine.
In 2022, we were directly told by the county commissioners that if you don't spend your fund balance, we're not gonna fund your continuation budget at 100%. And I'm the one who'll say it and stand by it in the sense that was told directly, personally, by several commissioners, if you don't spend the money, you're not getting more. And we've never had 100% of our annual continuation budget fully funded. Never, correct?
That is correct.
So they knew we were losing money every year and we knew it. And that needs to be said, because we go there and ask for full funding. We don't get full funding, it whittles us away.
As a matter of fact, during that July 20th presentation, part of the board's decision to utilize that fund balance was to share a plan with the county commissioners. And in fact, the board adopted a plan that we shared with the county commissioners that very expressly explained your plan to spend down the fund balance. So everyone was aware, from the board to the administration, to the Board of County Commissioners, of the board's intent to spend down the fund balance. So
And they've assured us that they'll support a crisis.
that's the impression I am under. I've heard, and I'm sure everybody in this room has heard, that they are our financial backstop. And if we find ourselves in an emergency situation, they would be the
And
financial
are
backstop.
those, and I won't speak for
We are, right?
It seems that way.
When do we pull that trigger?
It does. So I just kind of want to look at the continuation budget next year, because that's going to kind of influence where we go from here. Last time we talked about this, we were anticipating there could be an additional 2% from the state. The state passed a bill to ratify the biennial budget last week, and I think the General Assembly's about to go out on recess if they haven't already. So I have a pretty high degree of confidence that the 3% salary increases are what will be required next year. Matter of fact, DPI has already put out pay tables for next year. So that's kind of shored up. And also the manager's budget has passed. That may have passed the last time we met. Can't quite remember. But in total, between the increase in the special district tax and the increase in local revenues, we're expecting about 3.64 million to come in additional revenue. We know our continuation costs are 3.3 million. So that leaves a budget surplus next, well, it would have left a budget surplus in the continuation budget of $340,000. Unfortunately, we have this $5.1 million loss we need to contend with. So when you take that away, you know, and we also have, if the corrective action plan becomes permanent, Dr. Harris and I have been discussing vacancies in the positions that were identified in the corrective action plan. And at this point, we have, through attrition, netted just about every position that was in the corrective action plan. So we estimate next year the district will be able to net back about 2.4 million if the board adopts a budget that includes the allotment changes in the corrective action. So all that being said, with the additional $340,000, the $5.1 million loss, and the anticipated savings from the corrective action plan, as of right now, and this is subject to change over the next 30 days, we have about a $2.4 million hole that we need to fill. And as I've talked about before, and years before, we had a safety net, and the board could have very easily said, we're going to appropriate $2.4 million. Fund balance, we have 18% of fund balance, and we would go on, adopt a budget, and move on. The problem this year is we don't have any money to appropriate. And the board is required by law to pass a balanced budget. So as of today, in order to look forward to being able to pass a budget that only breaks even and does nothing to build back any semblance of a fund balance, we're looking at about a $2.4 million worth of reductions to the local operating budget. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that I think that it would be wise if we went beyond that 2.4 million, started looking at trying to rebuild some of the fund balance so that we don't find ourselves in this position again. So depending on how aggressive the board wants to get in trying to rebuild that fund balance, you know, that $2.4 million hole could be larger. It just depends on how fast we want to try and rebuild the fund balance. And that's pretty much all I got. It's very late, so I may have explained some things not clearly, but I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
When do we pull the trigger on them being our backstop? I know I've said this over and over again, but they told us that was true. We took down our fund balance. When can we say, yes, we are now in a crisis, please help?
Now would be a very good time.
Yeah. Then how?
I can say
Yeah, sorry.
first step, and for Mr. Myron, but he was just appointed, I think, this week. But one of my first steps, at least from administration to administration, would be to reach out to our new county manager, who has been with us along the way in these conversations, so.
And we'll have to officially let them know that where we are with our balance.
One other thing I didn't mention, I'd be remiss if I don't mention it, is that we're going to need to do that anyway. Because if you recall, last year we had cash flow issues in November, and the county graciously, because we're in an emergency situation, fronted us some special district tax. The cash situation we're in now is going to exacerbate that. And I anticipate instead of November being in a cash flow situation, we very likely could be facing a cash flow situation in September. So I think it's very wise to open that communication channel soon.
Dr. Hammond, what's your thinking on how do you want to handle this, get back to us and what to do in addition to what you're saying? And do you want to, is there going to be a plan to come to the board meeting with here's what we're thinking, or what's your process at this point? Because it is late and we're not trying to solve this tonight.
Understood, yeah, so I think we would need some time to, think through what that plan could look like. As Jonathan said, you know, the $2.3-ish million is just to kind of break even, if you will. But, I mean, I think it's probably most advantageous for us to come to the board with a plan that would help us to, get to the 2.3 and perhaps even beyond. That could certainly happen as early as our August meeting.
He looked at you.
But in the interim, in between now and then, my first step would be to reach out to our new county manager.
So tonight, we'll take this as information and wait for you to come back to us with whenever appropriate. Yeah, there's hands going up, sorry.
You said by law, we have to have a balanced budget.
Yes.
I guess for you or Eva, are there other laws, any other legal implications of our current fiscal situation?
Well, many, certainly. I mean, with regard to fund balance, there is no legal minimum. There's, the local government commission does not have fund balance minimums for school districts because you can't raise your own taxes, so the idea is it's supposed to be up to your commissioners. Certainly, if, you know, with regard to the reductions, if there need to be reductions in staffing, you know, that's something that we'll work through together. But, I'm not sure what other,
That's it, right?
yeah.
We do have a county policy in writing that our fund balance should be a minimum of 5.5%.
That's
That's
correct.
a policy though, right? So
It's a, yes,
obviously
there's a joint
violate.
commissioners school district policy that establishes a target of 5.5%.
It's not required, and that's a
It's
minimum.
also not
Right.
enforceable, apparently.
That's right, yeah.
Right,
We
that's right.
alerted them last year that we were below.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
We asked for
they're
more
aware.
money.
They are.
Yeah.
I can tell you that Education NC did a study of district fund balances. You can look at it, you can see what other districts are. Last year, there were 15 out of the 115 that were below 8%. 15. So the other 100 had a greater than 8% fund balance.
Maybe I dozed off that fast. What's our timeline for adopting a balanced budget?
So we're on a continuing spending resolution right now, which authorizes administration up to 90% of last year's budget. So the timeline is flexible. I certainly do not want to bring a budget to you until this problem is solved. We have adopted as late as October and November in years past. With 90% budget, we could operate into the third quarter of the year without adopting a budget. Certainly hope it'll be before that, but the last thing I want to do is bring a budget that the administration is not comfortable with.
Agreed. I think I'm asking more so like hearing back from the county and timeline for us to kind of give you, like you say, board October, right? Like, we really shouldn't operate beyond that. And so that kind of puts us in the staff on a timeline of, if the county says no, then we've got to be able to start working through and discussing options, right? Like, I mean, this is not sustainable. And even beyond this year, it's, what about next year? I mean, we've been, George was on the finance committee with me when we joined the board. We've been talking about this since we joined the committee, that we were just seeing trends with how things were being funded by the county, the trends of the state, you know, how we pay a lot of positions. We talked about this a couple of board meetings back for any community member who hasn't missed it. How we a lot of our, significantly more positions on our local funds, right? And so all of this was coming. We've been talking about it and talking about it and talking about it for ever since we've been on the board, saying that this day was gonna come if we don't start making changes. And so I just wanna make sure we kind of, we put ourselves or set up some expectations, I think, for Jonathan and the staff about, okay, we go to the county in the next 30 days and they tell us, yes, no, they're gonna, bail us out, and how much they're gonna bail us out, because they may not, right? They may say, okay, we're not gonna bail you out the whole 2-point-some million, right? We're only gonna give you 1.5 million. You guys we're gonna share this together. I'm not giving them ideas, right? And so I just want us to, I don't want this to go on until March.
And I do want to say, while you do have a continuing resolution, the law does say that you have to operate under a balanced budget resolution that covers 1 year, and that it says after the commissioners have made their appropriations, which just happened, right? That the Board of Education shall adopt a budget resolution, so, that covers 1 year. So it doesn't have a deadline for that, but it is assumed that you will be under a budget resolution that covers 1 year.
Right.
So your point, Visa, sounds like we have to be working in parallel to identify what we can do as a district. And I think that's what you were already planning to do. That's the meeting point.
And I don't know, like, do we start thinking about and discussing that? When do we wanna do it? How do we wanna do it? I mean, I don't want us to keep waiting, because if we have to make some really tough decisions that I know I don't want us to make, right? And I'm not gonna say them tonight. I don't wanna make those decisions. But if we have to make the decisions, I want us to be thoughtful, start having those discussions, start thinking about it, so we can figure out how we socialize that.
Along those lines, I feel like we should be transparent. We should let people know. Like, here's what's going on, and send us your best ideas. Because I feel like the people closest to, I just think our community has been very thoughtful and creative, and I would like more people to give us comments than fewer.
Right, Barb, I think that's how we got the first wave of corrective action stuff, is that, we've been talking about this, so it's not like the staff haven't been working with the principals, the staff, the staff advisory committees and things like that. So I don't know if, the scale of it, I don't think they've kind of now, okay, this is now the dollar amount, so now this is a viable option that we probably need to elevate. Because for me, I want to put it closest to the people who it's going to impact, right?
Yeah, me too. That's
I'm
what
not
saying.
saying I don't want to hear from the community, but at the end of the day, it's the staff, because this challenge, 80-some% of our budget is people. That other 20%, we can't negotiate whether we want lights on in school or not, or heat, right? And so I lean more to hearing from the staff about options. It's them.
Yeah.
For somebody who's been there and had to make the decision of laying myself off, it's great that a parent of the school wants to hear it, but I want it to be the staff. I want them to be talking about this. It's them first.
I would just say from a timeline perspective, time is of the essence. And so we would certainly do our due diligence. We're bringing something to the board in the August meeting. Great example with the bond conversation and some of our other hot topics over the last couple of months. We've certainly been accused of having these conversations when people are on vacation, and this is not the intent, right? But this is something that we have to start the discussions now. We don't have the luxury of waiting until we get back to school and, people are re-engaging.
Right. All right, anybody else? So we'll look to you to come back as soon as possible. And if it's August, it's August. If not, then it'll be the next time.
Any requests from the board or specificity on when you say bring back a plan?
Well, I think something we talked about was, let's do this collaboratively, because there's some pain points involved. Rather than this is the plan and we're kind of like,
I want the decision to fall on us as a board. I don't want Dr. Hamlin or Jonathan, I don't want them to I don't want the decision to be with them. I feel like I want them to bring us a whole menu of options. And I don't want them to narrow it down, and just come back, I feel like, to bite our staff in a particular way, and I don't think that's fair to them. I just want them to say, these are the options we've come forward for you to consider, and the 7 of us make that tough decision.
Does that resonate? Okay, all right, I think there's some direction there. Jonathan, we appreciate it. Thank you.